We are going to start today's session. We are again joined today by a very special guest speaker. We are joined by Dr. Shrinivasan, and he's going to talk to us about something really interesting, something we've never talked about in TTAS before. So it's going to be a fun session. We're going to talk about venomous snails and what he does to study them. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Srinivasan, and over to you.
Thank you, Snail, and thank you, Karishma ji. I'm so excited to meet all of you. How's everyone doing? I'm as excited as you are to talk to you about these snails. And I want to tell you about research. What we'll also do is maybe we'll do a little bit mini experiment online. So stay tuned for that mini experiment. And what I'm going to talk to you about today are these venomous cone snails. Right. So there are many venomous animals. And do you know what venomous animals are? Can you give some examples of venomous animals? Like you can type it in the chat window. What are some of the venomous animals you think you can think about?
Okay, everybody's saying snakes in the chat window.
Snakes, yeah. In fact, a lot of people confuse when I say I'm studying venomous snails. They say venomous snakes. Yes, snakes are venomous. They have these.
On that note, we got confused too. Actually, on that note, yes, we did.
Yes. So the typical, and you're right. They are snakes. So a venomous organism or a venomous animal is some that will have poison inside of them. And they'll use special stings to deliver that poison. So for example, in snakes, you can think they have fangs, they bite and they deliver poison. Here's another example of venomous animal, scorpion. It goes around with the sting. And if you try to harm it, it'll just sting you and deliver poison, right? So there are a lot of venomous and poisonous animals. Poisonous animals are those, they don't have a stinger, but they can make poison. So if some bigger animal eats them, they can release the poison. Right? So that's the difference between a venomous animal and a poisonous animal. So on land, you have venomous spiders, bees are venomous, snakes are venomous, as you said. In ocean, you also have a lot of venomous and poisonous creatures. And some examples are venomous jellyfish. They have these stingers and it burns and it hurts a lot. You have something called a pufferfish. It puffs up and as you can see down here, it has these spikes and it is just they make these toxins that are very deadly. So one group of animals in ocean that I study are these cone snails. Why do we call them cone snails? If you take a guess, they look like ice cream cone because they are conical. We think, okay, they look like a cone, and they're snails, let's call them cone snails. So in oceans and in sea, these snails, they make venom. And there are a lot of reasons why they make venom. But primarily, they make venom to catch food, catch their prey. And there are 3 types of venomous cone snails. One are called fish hunters. They primarily eat fish. Some snails like to eat worms, and some others like to eat other snails. So they are picky like we do, right? Sometimes I don't like broccoli. I don't want to eat that. I want to eat aloo. So they are picky like humans are. And they make venom specialized for their prey. So they have different types of venom to catch these different animals. They are very different from garden snails. So anytime I say snails, people think about garden snails. Wait, are garden snails also venomous? No. Garden snails are very harmless creatures. They also have shell and they're slow. But in contrast to garden snails, venomous snails are found in sea and they are very, very deadly. Sometimes what happens is some people, they go scuba diving and they find these beautiful shells with nice patterns and they think they are also harmless. And when they catch them and they try to put them in pocket, these snails, they get threatened and they release venom and can kill people. So these are very deadly animals. And they make venom for two reasons. Like I said, they make it to catch their food, but some of these venom are also for to protect themselves. So in the next video, I'm going to show you why do they need to protect themselves. Okay, so here's the video of a fish, and snails are very shy, right? If you go closer to them, what do the snails do? They just curl up and go into their shell, right? They just go in and they're very shy and very scared. So they don't stand a chance in the ocean where you have very nasty creatures like this fish. So you take a look at it. The snail is trying to come out. It just wants to eat its food. But this fish, this nasty fish is not going to let it come out. It's just as soon as the snail tries to come out, it's just going to attack it. So if you have such kind of dangerous creatures in sea, what would a poor little snail do? Evolutionarily, these snails have evolved venom so that they can now fight with this fish. And not only fight with them, in a way they can eat them, right? So let's take a look at the next video, how these snails actually catch their food. How do they catch the fish? So like I said, snails, because they are shy, they bury under the ocean soil. So they sort of are lightly buried. And they under the ocean, you have to think that there's not enough light. Like in the sea, there's not a lot of light. So what their eyesight is not very good. Like, we have good eyesight. And if our eyesights are not good, someone like me, I can put on my spectacles. But snails don't have specs. So what do they rely on? They rely on their nose. So they can smell their environment very well. So here's the snail's nose. It's sticking out the nose and smelling its environment. And now it has sensed there is a fish in the environment. Do you see a fish anywhere around here? Nope. But I'll show you in a minute where the fish is. So now it has smelled the fish in its environment. And you see it's extending this little tube here. So the tube is just going on, and there is our fish. Now, what does the snail do? The fish is waiting for the snail to come out, and it doesn't sense this tube here. And in a minute, bam! And whoa, what did it do? It ate the fish. What did it do there? It's like going around, and it's smart. It's very stealthy. It's hiding under. Then the fish wasn't suspecting. The fish was waiting for the shell to come out, but the snail very carefully took the tube out and captured the fish. How did a snail do that, right? So let's take a look at another video of another snail. And here you will see again. And all of this is in real time. So what this snail does is it's extending a venom duct, which is full of venom. It has poison in it. And when it goes close to the fish, it injects that venom. And you can see the fish is paralyzed. At first, the fish was moving around like crazy, as if it has an electronic shock. But then this fish doesn't move anymore. It's stiff and it's paralyzed. So, and you can see the fins are all stiffened out too. So something in the venom makes these fish paralyzed so that they cannot move much. And that way the fish cannot escape. It cannot swim away. And then once it's capable of paralyzing these fish, it opens its mouth wide open and then starts to swallow the fish. So a slow animal like a snail can catch a fish using its fast-acting venom.
That's pretty amazing, Dr. Srinivasan. That's amazing. Can we stop for some questions?
Yes.
Sure.
Do you have any? Everyone, if you have a question about this, we can talk about that. And
we do have a few in the chat window. So
yeah.
Ala asked a nice difference between, what is the difference between venomous and toxic?
That's a good question. So toxic is, you can compare toxic with poison. So any chemical that is harmful is toxic. So if it is going to harm you, it's toxic. Venomous is a word that we give to animals that can inject the toxin. So that's the
I
difference
see.
between toxin and venom. So
Oh, yes.
venoms are toxic. So
Yeah.
because if you ingest them, they may not be toxic, but if you inject them, they might become toxic. So yes.
All right, exactly. So, Ala also asked, are the cone snails very slow again, like garden snails? Does
They are.
snail space apply to them?
Yes, that's a good question too. Snails are very slow. They'll crawl around. Um, there are different types of snails. Because they are in sea, they like to swim or float a little bit, but they're not very good at it. So what they do is they try to make their shells as light as possible. So some snails that eat worms, they like to make heavy shells so they can be grounded and they can crawl slowly. But some that eat fish, they'll try to make lighter shells so they can be more agile and they can float and they can swim around, float around a little bit, not necessarily swim, but they're very slow.
Okay.
They're as slow as garden snails, yes.
So we have a lot of questions in the chat right now. The first question is what happens if there are many fish that are waiting for the snail?
That's a good question, and we will answer that question in next few slides. We'll see what happens when there are a lot of fish around and what does a snail do.
Okay, all right. Another question is about the venom in these snails. So do these snails need some time before they can fill venom back into their duct, or is it like a constant supply?
Great question. So the venom duct, again, in a few slides, we'll see the anatomy of the snail. The venom duct can make a lot of toxins and they make it continuously. The toxins are more when the snails are hungrier. So a more hungry snail will have a more deadly toxin and a lot of it. Because what it wants to make sure is to absolutely be able to catch a fish. If it makes a weak toxin or if the toxin is not enough, the fish will swim away, the food will swim away, and the snail would have wasted its toxin. And what will you end up with? You'll end up with a hungry snail. So they make continuous supply of toxins. And remember, the fish are also sort of attacking these snails. So they also have to make toxins to sort of protect themselves. So that's a continuously made toxin in that venom duct. They make different types of toxin depending on how big or how small they are. If they are baby snails, they have different toxins. If they are big adult snails, they'll have a different set of toxins.
Okay. Another very interesting question. How does the snail's own venom or toxin not affect it?
Great question. Yes. It will. That is why some snails are able to hunt other snails. So these toxins are harmless if they are ingested or if they eat it. So in fact, some people eat these snails as delicacy. They make soup out of these snails, and that is not toxic. So as long as they're eating it, they have digestive enzymes that can break down these toxins. The toxin is only active if they are injected into the bloodstream or if they are injected in the muscle. So that's when they are super toxic. So snails, if they don't inject themselves, they are safe. And just like snakes, if they don't bite themselves, they're fine. But if you eat them,
yeah. So a snail biting itself or a snake biting itself is making life difficult for yourself at altogether different levels.
Okay.
Another thing, Snail, we were talking of the interplay between this fish and snail. So is the fish trying to eat the snail when it goes there?
So if you look at the video, what happens is the snail proposes that little tube, that comes out, looks like a worm to the fish. And fish thinks that there's some worm coming out, so it tries to go eat that worm.
Okay.
That's what it's trying to do, pick on it and try to eat that. But it's, again, the snails are smart. They make their venom duct look like worm and swirl like worm. So when the fish is closer, it doesn't really realize that it's not a worm. It's actually the venom duct that's coming closer to it. So that's the interplay. And some fish are very smart. They know that snails are poisonous and toxic. So if you look at the snail shell patterns, they kind of signal that they are deadly. So some fish feel threatened, so they start attacking the snail in order to avoid that sting. So that's the interplay between a fish and a snail. Yeah.
That's really interesting. All right. Wow.
Okay, I think we can move ahead and we'll come back to questions in a bit again.
Sounds good. So let's look at the interplay, because Karishma ji mentioned that what is going on exactly. So here, let me pause the video for a second, or let it go. So here's the nose, and here's the tube filled with duct, and it's approaching the fish. And right at this point, something happens. Up until this point, we saw that the snail stings the fish and eats it. But there's one question. How is this fish not able to swim away? How is the fish attached to this tube? What is going on? How is the snail able to reel the fish in? So to answer that question, people started looking at anatomy. So here's what it looks like inside of a snail. So it has a big bulb. Venom is not made in this bulb. It's basically just a sort of a sac that pushes out the venom. All of the venom is made inside this venom duct. Okay. Whenever a snail is hungry, it'll push the venom out. But before it does that, it has this pouch of teeth. How many teeth do you have? 30, 30.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
They may have less than that. We could wait to see what their number are. Kavish says 100. Everything for Kavish is centuries. Allah says 32. No, we are going into millions also. All right.
And can you guess how many teeth are there in this pouch? There are hundreds of teeth, actually. So
teeth?
Yes, those are teeth. So these are snail teeth. They don't have it in their mouth like we do, but they carry their teeth in a pouch or a sack like that. And whenever snail gets hungry, what it does is it will take one teeth at a time. So it will take one stinger at a time and load it. And this is the musculature, or it's the tube that actually extends out. So here you can see it loads that teeth right in the front. And it's like a needle, like an injection needle. Nobody likes those injection needles, right? We don't like it. So what it does, it's very carefully holds onto that. And then here, it's a blown up image here. So you can see when it's ready to hunt, it'll load that teeth and inject the venom through that needle-like teeth. So if you look at a microscopic image of this teeth, if you blow it further, you can see that it's actually a hollow tube. It's like a hollow tube, so that when venom comes out, it can flow through that tube-like teeth or a syringe-like teeth. And if you blow it up further at the tip, you can see the shape of this teeth. What does it look like? It looks like a arrow or a harpoon, right?
Yeah.
Here, what happens is this end goes into the fish, but this end over here is so sharp. These sharp ends can hold on to the fish. So the fish gets tethered, and then immediately the snail has injected its paralytic toxin. So the fish cannot move any further. And this tether or harpoon-like teeth can then slowly reel the fish in. So that's how a snail is successful in capturing a fish. Sometimes sometimes snails can be unsuccessful too, right? So let's say even despite their best attempts, they inject, but fish quickly swims away. In that case, what happens? The snail will scout around the locality. It'll look for a paralyzed fish because it has injected toxin. The fish cannot swim too far. At some point, the fish becomes tired and then it's paralyzed and it's just lying on the ground. So what snail does is it will scout around looking for a paralyzed fish and then go eat it up. But that's very rare. They're very good at attacking their fish and eating them. And here's a picture of that is blowing up. So here you can see this tube or proboscis is filled with venom, and it injects that using this sharp teeth, and then it can capture that fish. Any questions here?
Yes, Srinivasan, other than the fact that we are all completely amazed at these fascinating creatures that you study, and I'm thinking, what would it be like if we extended our teeth and went and said, I don't like you? Yeah, something to think about.
My wife is a dentist, so if you don't like her teeth, I can tell her she can fix it for you.
So you guys are studying teeth of a very different variety.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, so we have some really great questions in the chat window again. Before we get to any, this is an amazingly funny question, and I absolutely love it. It's, since the snail have so many teeth, do these snails get cavities like we do?
Well, that's a good question. We have never studied that. They are good at throwing away their teeth routinely. So what happens after it's eaten and digested fish is the snail will regurgitate the contents out. So they only need the flesh, right? So what happens is after the fish is eaten up, the snail will throw out the fish scales and bones and fish that it doesn't like. And along with those things, the teeth that it used to hunt the fish, that also comes out. So it's good at throwing away that teeth that it used. Because it has a pouch of hundreds of them, if the teeth is going bad, it can throw it away and make another teeth. They are very good at making their own teeth. And they can replenish that stock. Yes.
Wow. So they basically have use and throw teeth.
Yeah, have use and throw teeth. Yes.
That's
why
amazing.
they scientists under the ocean. There's no use for them there.
Yes.
Okay. Another question is again about venomous snails in general. So are all snails that live in the sea venomous or only some of them?
I asked that question to my advisors when I was young too. That's a great question. And the reason I asked that question was, growing up, I saw Vishnu holding a shank. And I said, oh, maybe that also is venomous. I should study that. Not all shank or not all shells or snails are venomous. There are a very small group of snails that are venomous. A lot of the other snails and other shells, like conch shells, they are vegetarian. They like to eat plants and they bite on plants, and their anatomy and their biology is completely different. So yes, to answer the question, no, not all snails are venomous.
Another few questions on teeth, snail teeth. Yeah, looks like it's fascinated all of us.
Yes.
What is this tooth made of? Is it flexible? Is it calcium deposit like our teeth? How heavy are these teeth?
That's a good question. It's I should know the answer to this question. So these are sharp they feel like plastic. They're like but they're not plastic. They are definitely made of calcium, like some form of calcium. They are breakable, so they are very fragile. But they can be bent. They are bendable. You can bend them, and they are quite flexible.
Okay, but they're not heavy.
They are not heavy.
It's like taking it out through that little duct, and yeah. Okay.
No, they are not heavy. They are very light. Like you can think about it like they feel like let's say if you bite on your nail and if you just have a small little nail, it feels like that.
Okay.
All right.
Another really great question. So if these snails can produce this venom and it paralyzes fish and they can be so deadly, why do they have a shell to protect them if they have venom?
Everybody needs a backup, right? So the snails also need a backup. So these fish are not the only ones attacking snails. Can you think of a larger animal in the sea that is more deadly and more ferocious?
Like, I don't know, jellyfish, or what would you
They
say?
have this
Larger
huge
fish?
fin and they've made movies out of it too.
Shark?
Stingray?
Yes,
Sharks? Huh?
they're big sharks. They are really big sharks, and the venom is not enough to ward off those large predators. So when a big deadly shark is swimming around and it finds a shell, it's just going to go bite on it. If the snail doesn't have a shell, it'll die. Sometimes we see those bite marks on the shell too. So, when we collect these snails, there are some that will clearly have a big bite mark. And that's coming from large fish and larger predators that are trying to bite on these snails. So to protect themselves from these bigger predators, they need a shell to protect themselves.
Okay, I think we can move ahead and then we'll come back for some more questions.
Perfect. So so we talk about this venom, and let's quickly go through what is this venom made of. So this venom, you can think about as a complex soup. Okay, so this venom is made of a lot of proteins. Proteins are good for health, right? But some proteins are also toxic. So the snail venom is actually a cocktail of small proteins. And what scientists have figured out is groups of proteins work together to function. And because there are groups of proteins that are working together, they call them cabals. Do you know what a cabal means? Well, cabals are these secret groups, secret societies that are plotting together and scheming together. So what scientists thought was, okay, because these proteins are very mysterious and they're very secretive, they're working together, we'll call them toxin cabals. So if you remember, the fish was, when it was stung, it was all paralyzed and it felt like it had been tased or had an electric shock kind of experience. There's a group of toxins, for example, these 4 here in the cartoon, they work together to give that electric shock. And we call them lightning strike cabal. On the other hand, there is a different group of toxin that makes the fish paralyzed. And those groups of toxins are called motor cabal because they hamper the motor functions of the fish. By motor function, I mean they're not swimming around and they are kind of just immovable. So those group of toxins are called motor cabal. So there are many different cabals, and we'll look at one more, but essentially all these toxins can be grouped into small groups of proteins. And we are now studying what each protein in the venom does, what is its function, and how we can use these proteins and these venom peptides to make medicines. Now, we saw one way a snail ate the fish, and someone asked the question, right? What happens when there's lots of fish around? What will happen? And I also said snails are very picky eaters. So there are different ways and different styles in which these snails like to eat. So if you think about your favorite food, there are many ways to eat that food. For example, if you like eating eggs, you can, make omelet out of it. You can have scrambled egg. You can put egg in a cake and eat it. You can also boil the egg and eat it. So different styles of eating food requires different tools, different equipment, right? Similarly, to eat fish in different styles, the snails will make different kinds of cabals. When there's lots of fish around, for example, here when there are schools of fish, this is a strategy for the snail to attack groups of fish or large schools of fish. It will go near the schools of fish and release this toxin in water. What these toxins do is they make these fish sleepy and they're happy, they're in a kind of light-headed state and they are not doing much. And then it can capture schools of fish in its mouth and then use its stinger to eat one fish at a time. So while it's inside the mouth, all of these other fish are happily hanging out. They have no problem and they don't even realize. They're just happily sitting there. Because they are so happy and blissful, we decided to call them Nirvana Cabal toxins. So they sort of release Nirvana Cabal toxins and catch these big schools of fish.
Srinivasan, I'm switching fields only so that I get to name these toxins. Like I'm joining you on the other side. This is just too inspirational and very creative.
If you switch fields, you can name your snails, you can name your toxins, you can name your own group of toxins. There's a wide variety to play around with. So happily switch fields. We'll work together.
That's great. So it's fascinating for me. This was like the snails going grocery shopping. You know, you buy a lot of stuff and then you decide like one by one when I want to consume them.
Right. Yeah. I think you have a nice fish tank inside of your mouth and they say, okay, this fish looks healthy. I'm going to eat this one today. That looks more tasty today. So I'm going to eat that one today. So yes, it's a choice for these snails.
So we have some really interesting questions again in the chat window. The first question is, can fish develop like an antitoxin or a way to become resistant to these toxins that these venomous snails are releasing?
That's a great question. There is no anti-venom for these snails. So even when humans get stung, we don't have an anti-venom for them. But in an evolutionary arms race, for example, fish also have to be smart. They can't just be as dumb, right? So what they try to do is they come up with clever strategies. The way these toxins works is they have to bind to some receptor. Okay, I think that might be a little complex to understand, but think about it as a receiver for toxin. What fish is doing is it's constantly changing that receiver so that the toxin is no longer active. But when that happens, snail has to be smart again and make a toxin that actually fits that receiver. So this is kind of a constant tug of war between fish and snail, and that's how evolutionarily they keep progressing. They evolve toxin resistance, and then snails also have a toxin to fight that resistance.
So Snail, 2-3 questions about venom duct. One is, what if the tooth gets stuck in the duct that Allah asked? And I'm tempted to say root canal, but I won't. And the second is, what if the duct is broken? What if a snail is injured because of some ship or some, human activity in the ocean or something like that?
That's very likely. You're right. Sometimes these snails too can get injured and they are able to heal themselves. So in a lot of times, if this duct is injured to a point where it can heal, they can heal. But if it's very badly injured, then the snail is most likely going to die. So if it's very badly injured, there's nothing the snail can do. The tooth is very thin compared to the duct. So the duct is like a big tunnel and the tooth is like a tiny hair. So it's more likely floating around in the venom. It can float around in the proboscis or in that duct. But snail is very good at not letting it go into the duct. What it does is, that's why the pouch is in this rear end of the mouth. So what it does is it loads one right at the tip and holds it in with a nice tight muscle. So it doesn't, it's not going to go back.
And then there's some question, Snail, about, does venom smell bad?
Snails smell bad. Venom, maybe not necessarily. I've never smelled a venom. I think as a scientist, we are not allowed to smell things, but it doesn't smell bad. But the snails do. If they are dead inside a shell, you don't want to smell a dead snail. It's very bad.
Okay. I think another question which I'm thinking everybody already knows the answer to, but maybe it's important to just stress on this again. The question is, can these snails be kept as pets in aquariums?
Good question. We have some pets in our lab. We call them Sally and Terry, and they have been in as our pet for 12 years or something. So they can be kept as pets. I wouldn't advise keeping a shell in your house because they're so deadly. If you keep going and touching them, it's going to be difficult. But if you're careful, you can maintain one. But you'll have to be good at giving them the right kind of fish to eat. Otherwise, they won't be happy snails.
Yes. So overall, because obviously they're venomous, it's better not to keep them as
yes.
pets.
Would you keep a snake as your pet is the question. And if you will keep a snake as your pet, then you can keep a snail as your pet.
And what is even more frightening, Dr. Srinivasan, is some people are saying, yes, they will keep a snake as a pet. And right now I am paralyzed without venom.
Without any venom, yes. Okay. So I'll quickly go into the next one because this is something that I wanted to make sure I get through. How do we study snail venom in a lab? Okay. So what we do is we have these tiny tubes and we collect snail venom, we'll milk venom. So what we do is we apply fish oil to sort of fool the snail that we have a fish around. And then when it extends its proboscis, it's going to inject venom in that tube. So we collect some venom in that tube. And then we have this big machine called a chromatograph. It's a chromatography machine. What this machine does is when we put the venom in the machine, it'll spit it out into different parts. Like, for example, if you put a tomato soup in this machine, it'll tell you exactly what the ingredients are. It'll say, oh, there's tomato, there's water, there's salt, there's masala, everything. So it'll just spit it out. And then we take these different parts of the venom and then test them in animal models. And I think all of you know about animal models by now, right? There was a session on animal models, right? So some of the animal models are zebrafish and some are mouse. So I work with these two model systems. So the way we test these is, like I said, in these two different animal models. Shall we do an experiment now together? Yes? Okay. So to be able to do an experiment as scientists, what we do is we start out with an observation. What did we observe? The snail is making the fish sleepy, right? It's making this fish immovable. So there's some toxin in there. That's the observation we saw. So based on this observation, the next thing what we do is make a hypothesis. So what are some of the hypotheses you can make? Can you type a few in your chat window?
Certainly, Dr. Srinivasan, we'll just wait for them to type. This question may take a little typing from them.
Okay.
So Yuvashri says alternative null hypothesis. Ahala says it's scarier than snakes and sharks. Okay. But
yes.
So maybe we can just tell them what is the hypothesis if they are a little concerned.
So here, let's do that. Why don't we do it that way? So the hypothesis based on an observation we can make is there's something in the venom that is going to make fish sleepy. So the observation and hypothesis are usually quite similar. It feeds into each other. So we can hypothesize that maybe there are venom proteins that make fish sleepy. But the question is, does the entire venom make it sleepy, or are there certain special proteins that are enough to make the fish sleepy? That is what we want to test. Okay. So in order to do that, what we do is we'll take a fish in a small well, and let's try. You tell me. I'll play this video and tell me which of these two fish is moving fast and which one is the slower one. Okay, of these two, which is moving slower or not moving at all? So which of the fish is moving fast or moving quite often? So is it the left or the right?
Everybody's saying left one.
Yes, that's moving a lot faster than the right one, right? Okay.
Yes.
And you're right. And that's what we did. What we did was we applied venom onto the fish in the right side. So that's a venom treated animal. And the one on the left is control. We didn't add anything. So the way to do an experiment is to always have a control. If I only did one, I wouldn't know whether that's actually a real effect or not. So when you're doing an experiment, have your controls, and then you can compare them with what you're testing. And finally, what's our conclusion? Our conclusion was there are venom proteins that cause the fish sleepy, or they make the fish sleepy. And not all venom make fish sleepy. There are very certain parts of the venom that make the fish sleepy. If we did a similar experiment in mouse, I can tell you the conclusion already. So this is what we did. So these are different parts of the venom. We take each of them and inject in mouse. And what we find is that some parts of the venom make the mouse run around in circles. Sometimes they are just jumping on cage. And some of these make their head swing a lot. So different venom make different kind of behavior in these animals. And we are trying to study how we can use these to understand how the brain works. How does a fish brain work, or how does a mouse brain work? And we can make medications out of it. So again, let's go forward and see, do they eat other animals? And like I said, yes, they do. And here's a video of a snail eating a worm. So here there's a fireworm, which is its favorite food. And it's also doing a similar strategy where it will look at the worm, and you will see in a minute that it injects venom in the worm, and the worm curls up, and then it will eat that worm. So the question is, do you think they'll have a different kind of venom compared to fish eating snails? The answer is yes. They do,
Yes.
because they'll have a complete, they're not making this worm sleepy. They're just making this worm curl up. So the kinds of venom in a worm hunting snail is completely different from a fish hunting snail. I saw a question on the chat box. Why do we care about studying these snails? Why should you care about watching a snail eat a fish? Sure. The uses of snail are, of course, you can make these nice ornaments and nice key rings out of these, the shells of cone snail. But it goes far beyond the use. The venom of these snail are actually marketed as drugs or medicine. And here's an FDA-approved medicine that was made out of snail venom. This is called Prialt, which is primary alternative to morphine. And this is a pain medication. So doctors give this medicine to people who are suffering with severe pain. And that's what is use of this snail venom. What are some other uses? Now scientists are studying to make medications for different kinds of diseases like diabetes, epilepsy, and maybe some of these are actually cardioprotective. So some medications for the heart. In fact, recently we started looking into snail venom for making medications for COVID. So there are different components of the snail venom that can be used as medicine. So a question you might ask is, well, they are toxic and they're deadly. How can they be made into medicine? Groups of toxin are going to be deadly, but parts of these toxin, when we isolate and dose them right, they can be used as a medication. So it's the same as food. If you eat too much food, your stomach will feel sick and you won't feel like eating more. And then you will throw up and that will make you sick. But if you eat the right amount of food, you will be healthy. So the same logic applies to the snail venom. Any questions so far?
So lots of questions about the whole painkiller role, right, Snail? And it kind of makes sense, because if it puffs something out and the fish goes sleepy, it's kind of dumbing them down or their senses down, which in somebody who has chronic pain for different reasons, right? It would help reduce their sensory perception of that pain or whatever level it acts at. It kind of makes sense. But I think the question they had is, what if they give too much of a dose? Wouldn't the effect of pain actually cause serious harm to the human?
That's a great question. Some drugs, the chemical drugs that make, will have a lot of side effects. If you dose it too much, there will be side effects. What we have found with snail venom drugs is that if you accidentally dose it too much, if you give 100 times the dose, you don't see much side effects. So these snail toxins are very selective and they're very good at targeting what they target. So if you dose it too much, the minimum side effect is basically people feel sleepy. So the pain drug that I told you about, or there are other pain drugs that are now being tested. What scientists do is to assess the side effects or the profiles of these toxin, they do try to dose it at much higher concentration or much larger dose, and then they study what side effects are. A lot of times they have very minimal side effects.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay, another question that has been popping into the chat window a lot is, are these snails found in specific parts of the ocean, specific areas around the world, or are they everywhere?
Good question. That's a great question. These snails are widely distributed all over the world. And people are, the snails we get, they are from Philippines. We get some snails from California, but there are a lot of snails in and around Indian Ocean, and they are widely distributed all over the world.
Okay. Also, yes, the question on the snails and insulin, the snail venom and insulin. Is there a connection, Dr. Srinivasan?
Yes, it's recently found by a very good friend of mine. They discovered that when the snail, it's from that snail that has this wide net-like mouth. So it's a strategy for snails to make fish sleepy. So insulins are molecules that lower the blood glucose. What snails have done is they make fish insulin and release it. And when they release that, what happens is the blood glucose levels in the fish go down. And when you don't have glucose, you're out of energy. And when you're out of energy, you cannot swim away. So the snails are actually good at making insulin-like proteins.
Molecules. Okay.
And then catch fish.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and then we'll come back to questions at the end.
Perfect. So how many types of snails are there? I showed you 2 different strategies. There are hundreds and hundreds of types of snails. There are more than 800 species of cone snails. They're widely distributed around the world, and they make more than 200 unique toxins. Each species makes more than 200 unique toxins. So if you do the math, 200 times 800 toxins, how much? It's like 160,000 toxins available. And we have only barely studied a few hundred toxins. There are lakhs and lakhs of proteins that we are still studying, still figuring out what their use is and why the snail is making it and how we can use it to make medicine. So that's 800 species that I'm talking about. These are just cone snails. In addition to cone snails, there are more than 10,000 species of venomous snails. Here's an example of one of the snails that I study. They're tiny, tiny snails. They're very tiny microscopic snails that hunt worm and eat little worms. And they're also venomous. And imagine 200 times 10,000, that's like 20 lakh toxin. That's different from cone snail toxin. And all of these are active and all of them have some purpose, some role. And this is where we encourage everyone to study these, because there are few hundred scientists who are studying these snails, but there are lakhs of toxin available, still waiting to be discovered, still waiting to be named, and we can make more medicine. And I'll leave you with this one last video. One of the recently discovered snail species, these are called vampire snails. And we think they are going to be useful to doctors and surgeons. And the reason is the feeding habit of this snail is completely different from other snails. So here you will see in a minute why these are called vampire snails. So here's a fish that's sleeping, and this snail extends its tube, and you can see it sucking blood out of the fish. So it's feeding on the fish blood. So it's very good. So there are two things going on. The snail is very good at anesthetizing the fish. It's very good at keeping the fish sleepy till its belly is full. And now you'll see the fish was about to swim away, but snail did something to put it back to sleep and then continues to suck blood out of that fish. So there are two things we think are going on in this snail that if we research this venom, we can find. One is, are there anesthetics in the venom that we can use? So when patients have to undergo surgery, they need anesthesia or anesthetics. Can we use one of these anesthetics from these venom? And now you can see, once the snail was full, the fish woke up and it swam away. And what we observe in that fish is that it will have a little wound and then it closes up. When we get hurt and when we start to bleed, what happens? After some time, we have a scab or the blood clots, right? But the snail has figured out a way to prevent blood from clotting when it's sucking the blood. It flows very nicely. So what scientists are thinking is maybe there are some blood thinners or anticoagulants that actually surgeons can use. When they are doing operation, they can give these blood thinners or these anticoagulants. Now, I'm only a scientist. I'm not a surgeon. So this is all I had to talk, and I'm ready to take more questions and we can discuss more about these things.
Thank you for this amazing session. I have goosebumps literally from these vampire snails. It's mind-blowing.
Really. I mean, it's only thanks to you, Dr. Srinivasan, we can get an insight into this whole world, underwater ocean world, right? So I will enormous respect for snails and snail venom researchers like you.
I'm happy. This makes my day now. So I'm so happy to be able to talk to all of you about these snails. I think I was 22 when I learned about these snails. So I wanted to make sure we learn about these snails as early as possible. So if you think you find these snails interesting, study hard, work hard, and join us in doing these snail research.
That's wonderful. It seems to be a very nice community.
Other than that, thank you so much for inviting me, Karishma. Thank you, Snehal. It's been
we have some few more questions, Dr. Srinivasan. Maybe we can take a few. Sure.
So I think one question is, how big usually are these snails and how long do they live?
No, we don't know how long do they live, because the reason we don't know is we have not observed them in captivity, one. And we don't know how to study their age. We can look at the rings on the shell, but that doesn't really give us an idea on what the age is. So it's still unknown how long they can live. They can grow really big. So I think some of the largest shells are like this, I don't know, 20 centimeters or so. And the tiniest one are microscopic. They're really tiny, few millimeters. So there's a wide range in size.
Can see that.
Another question is, when scientists are studying these snails, isn't there a chance that they could get injected with this venom? So how do you deal with that, or what safety precautions do you use?
Scientists have to be very careful. We have a bunch of safety protocols in place. We have to wear tight gloves and then make sure that we have the right tools to dissect and study these snails. If we do get accidentally injected, which hasn't happened very often, what happens is we just have to wait it out. You go to a hospital and then doctors take care of you. There's no anti-venom, but you have to be very careful in handling these snails.
All right. I think with that, we will come to an end of this session. Thank you so much again for joining us, and thank you for this wonderful talk.